always believed that when your heart knows peace, your life must be on the right path. That's how I felt every morning waking up next to Daniel. He was more than my husband, he was the reason I still believed in love after years of grief, disappointment, and loneliness. For 10 years, he was my anchor, my best friend, the man who kissed my forehead even on the days I felt unworthy of affection. We built a quiet life in Maplewood, a small town with white fences, modest homes, and neighbors who waved from their porches. It wasn't glamorous, but it was ours. We had a daughter, Ellie, 7 years old and already too smart for her own good. Daniel adored her. He made her lunches, braided her hair before school, and tucked her in with stories about knights and kingdoms every night. Sometimes, I'd just sit in the hallway and listen. His voice had this warmth that made you believe everything would be okay. Until one night, it wasn't. It started like any other evening. We had dinner together. Daniel made his famous lemon chicken. We talked about Ellie's upcoming piano recital, laughed about a ridiculous squirrel that had been stealing socks from our laundry line. Nothing strange. Nothing out of the ordinary. But looking back, I can't shake the feeling that there was something in his eyes that night, a flicker of distance, like part of him was already gone. I asked him if everything was all right, and he smiled, brushed a strand of hair behind my ear, and said, "Of course. Just tired." That was the last thing he ever said to me. Around midnight, I woke up to an empty bed. At first, I thought he was in the bathroom. Then maybe getting water. Then maybe still up watching one of those history documentaries he loved. But the house was silent. Still. Too still. I checked every room. No Daniel. His shoes were gone. His jacket, gone. His phone, gone. I waited. Pacing the living room, staring at the clock as the minutes turned to hours. 1 a.m. 2:30. By 4 a.m., I was calling hospitals, the police, anyone. I felt my lungs caving in with each unanswered question. They asked if he had any enemies, if we had argued recently, if he had been acting differently. And I kept saying no. 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 Because I didn't want to admit the truth that was now clawing its way into my chest. Something was wrong. Something was very wrong. The police filed a missing persons report, but they said there were no signs of foul play. No blood. No break-in. No leads. They told me maybe he just needed space. That men sometimes walk away, start over. I wanted to scream at them. Daniel wouldn't do that. Not to me. Not to Ellie. He wasn't that kind of man. He was solid. Devoted. Predictable, even. But the days went on. Then a week. Then 2. And still, nothing. No calls. No credit card activity. No trace. Just silence. I tried to stay strong for Ellie. I told her Daddy was away on a work trip. That he'd be back soon. But kids know. She asked me why I cried when I thought she was asleep. She asked me if Daddy didn't love us anymore. Every time she asked, it felt like knives twisting in my chest. I didn't have answers for her. I didn't have answers for myself. The silence of his absence became louder than any storm I'd ever faced. And in that silence, something else began to stir. Doubt. Not just fear for his safety, but this slow, creeping question that I didn't want to acknowledge. What if I never really knew the man I married? I went through his things. His closet, his drawers, his office. Not because I didn't trust him, but because I needed to understand. I needed to find a clue, a message, anything. I found nothing. Nothing out of place. Nothing suspicious. Until I opened the bottom drawer of his old wooden desk. It was locked, which wasn't unusual. He kept old tax papers and personal files in there. But I couldn't find the key, and something in my gut told me that whatever I was looking for, it was inside that drawer. After 2 days of searching, I finally found the key taped behind a loose board in our bedroom closet. My hands were shaking as I unlocked it, heart pounding like I was about to open Pandora's box. And maybe I did. Inside, there was a small black notebook, worn and creased like it had been opened 100 times. I opened it. The first page was blank. The second page had a name I didn't recognize, Claire Matthews. Underneath was a phone number. I flipped the pages, more names. More numbers. Cities I'd never heard him mention. Dates that didn't match up with anything I remembered. The last page simply read, if something happens, don't trust them. Them? Who was them? My hands went numb. I stared at the page, feeling like I was looking at a version of my husband I'd never met. My Daniel, warm, kind, reliable Daniel, had secrets. And suddenly, everything I thought I knew about my life, my marriage, and the father of my child began to unravel. And that was only the beginning. After I found that black notebook, I couldn't sleep. I lay awake night after night staring at the ceiling, turning over every moment I'd shared with Daniel in my mind, trying to spot the lies hiding in plain sight. I replayed conversations word for word, tried to remember if he ever mentioned the names in that notebook, Claire Matthews, Jonathan Pierce, Elena Westbrook. But none of them sounded familiar. They weren't our friends. They weren't his co-workers. They were ghosts. And now, so was he. The notebook became an obsession. I kept it hidden in the lining of my coat closet, checking it every day like the words might change or offer me new answers if I stared long enough. Eventually, I dialed the first number. My hand was trembling so badly I nearly dropped the phone. It rang 4 times. Then someone answered. Hello. The voice was cautious, female, maybe late 30s. I froze for a second, then forced the words out. Is this Claire Matthews? Silence. Then, who is this? I took a breath, trying to steady myself. My name is Rebecca Anderson. I think you might have known my husband, Daniel Anderson. He's missing. Another pause. Then her voice, tight and wary. I don't know who you are. Please don't call this number again. Click. She hung up before I could say anything else. But in her voice, I heard it. That pause. That flicker of recognition. She knew Daniel. She just didn't want to admit it. I sat on the floor for almost an hour, holding the phone like it might bring him back. Who was this woman? How did she know him? Was she an old flame? A friend? Something worse? I needed to know. I couldn't live in this fog any longer. I called a private investigator. His name was Miles Carter. Retired cop, looked like he hadn't smiled since the 90s, but he listened carefully and took notes without judgment. I handed him the notebook and told him everything. The night Daniel disappeared. The drawer. The message. The names. I half expected him to laugh at me, to tell me I was paranoid. But he didn't. He looked at me with this quiet intensity and said, if your husband left behind a message like that, Mrs. Anderson, then he knew someone was coming for him. Those words haunted me. Coming for him. Who? Why? Daniel was an insurance analyst, for God's sake. He wore sweater vest. He drank chamomile tea. The idea of him being caught up in something dangerous felt ridiculous, but then again, so did finding a list of strange names locked in a desk drawer. A week passed before Carter called me again. He asked me to meet him at a diner off Route 27, a grimy little place that smelled like burnt coffee and fried onions. He slid into the booth across from me and handed me a manila folder. Inside were photos. Of Daniel. But not the Daniel I knew. There were pictures of him in Atlanta, 2 states away. At a gas station. At a post office. With a woman. Holding her hand. Smiling. That woman was Claire Matthews. They weren't co-workers. They weren't strangers. They were lovers. I felt the blood drain from my face. Carter didn't sugarcoat it. They've been seen together on and off for at least 4 years. He's been living a double life. Different name, different address, everything. Your husband isn't who you think he is. I couldn't breathe. My mind kept screaming no, 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 but the pictures didn't lie. How could he? How could he lie to me, to Ellie, to all of us? I thought of all the nights he said he was traveling for work. All the weekends he claimed he was at conferences. I thought of every kiss, every promise. Every bedtime story. All of it was a performance. I felt like I was standing on the edge of a cliff, and the ground had just crumbled beneath me. But that wasn't even the worst of it. Carter showed me one final photo. It was Daniel again, only this time he was holding a little boy. About 3 years old. Blonde hair, same deep-set eyes as Daniel. Claire stood beside them, her hand resting on the child's back. I didn't need to ask. I knew what I was looking at. My husband had a second family. A second life. And somehow, through all the years, I never saw the signs. I drove home in a haze. I barely remember pulling into the driveway. I walked inside, looked at the walls of our home, the wedding photos, the framed drawings Ellie had made, the family portraits from Christmases past, and they all felt fake. Like a set built for a play. And I was the only one who didn't know I was acting. I collapsed onto the living room floor and sobbed until my ribs hurt. How long had he been lying to me? Did he ever love me? Was I just the cover story? I thought of Ellie, her little heart so full of love for the man who used to braid her hair. How was I going to tell her that her father had another child? Another wife? No. I couldn't. Not yet. I had to protect her. But I also had to know everything. Because if Daniel had lied about this, what else had he lied about? And why had he disappeared? I didn't sleep for 3 days after seeing those photos. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw Daniel's hand wrapped around that woman's, the way he used to hold mine. I saw the boy's face and the way Daniel was smiling down at him like he was the center of his world. I kept thinking about how many nights I stayed up waiting for him to come home, how many birthdays I planned with balloons and cake while he was somewhere else, living a second life that felt more real than mine ever had. My mind kept circling the same cruel questions. Why? Why me? Why her? Why both? But the deeper question, the one that clawed at me like a splinter under the skin, was how he managed to keep this hidden so perfectly for so long. And what the hell he meant by that message, don't trust them. I kept the truth hidden from Ellie. I couldn't bear to see her world shatter the way mine had. She still asked when Daddy was coming home, and I gave her the same lie with a trembling smile. Soon, sweetheart. He's just working. But inside, I was unraveling. I stopped eating. I couldn't look in the mirror without seeing the fool I'd become. And the worst part was that I still missed him. Even after everything, my body still ached for him at night. Grief and betrayal twisted together until I couldn't tell them apart. Carter kept digging. He found out that Daniel had been using the name Mark Ellis with Claire. They had a house in a suburb outside Atlanta, quiet, upscale, eerily similar to the life he built with me. Same kind of neighborhood, same kind of lies. But when Carter tried to approach Claire again, she was gone. House emptied. No forwarding address. It was like she vanished into thin air. And that's when things took a darker turn. Carter called me late one night, his voice low and urgent. He told me someone had broken into his office. Files were stolen. His camera equipment smashed. But the only thing missing was the folder on Daniel. Someone didn't want us to keep digging. And suddenly, this wasn't just about cheating or lies. This was about secrets, the kind people were willing to hurt for. I became obsessed. I searched Daniel's laptop, his emails, anything that might lead me to answers. That's when I found the second key. It was hidden in a small zippered pouch in his suitcase. I recognized it immediately. It belonged to the safety deposit box we had at the local bank, one we hadn't used in years. I went the very next morning, heart pounding so hard I thought I might collapse before I even made it inside. The box held only 2 items. A flash drive. And a sealed envelope with my name written on the front in Daniel's handwriting. My hands trembled as I opened it. Inside was a letter. Rebecca, it began, if you're reading this, I've already disappeared. I'm sorry. I never wanted you to be part of this. I kept you in the dark to keep you safe. But now you need to know the truth. My breath caught. I sat in the bank vault frozen, devouring every word. My real name isn't Daniel Anderson. I've gone by a dozen names over the years. I've worked for people I can't name. Done things I'm not proud of. I thought I could leave that life behind. Start over with you. I wanted that so badly. But the past doesn't stay buried, no matter how hard you try. They found me. And now you're not safe either. My vision blurred. My mouth went dry. The letter ended with a warning. Trust no one. Not the police. Not my boss. Not even Claire. If anything happens to me, go to someone named Howard Green in D.C. He owes me. He'll know what to do. I didn't know what to think. A fake name. A criminal past. Was he a spy? A fugitive? A traitor? My entire reality was unraveling at the seams. And the flash drive, when I got home and plugged it in, only deepened the nightmare. It was filled with documents, some redacted, some coded, but I understood enough to feel my stomach turn. bank transactions tied to shell corporations, surveillance footage of men I'd never seen, emails about an operation called Blue Winter. One message said, "We neutralize Anderson if he goes dark. Claire will handle the wife if necessary." That's when the panic hit me like a freight train. If necessary. What the hell did that mean? Suddenly, the break-in at Carter's office, Claire disappearing, the warning in the letter, it all clicked. This wasn't just Daniel running from his mistakes. He was running from people who wanted him dead. And if I kept pushing, I might be next. I started watching the street outside my house like a paranoid prisoner. Every unfamiliar car made my skin crawl. Every knock at the door made my heart race. I stopped letting Ellie walk to school. I started sleeping with a kitchen knife under my pillow. Because whoever Daniel was, he hadn't just lied to me, he'd brought danger to my doorstep. And I had no idea how deep it went. But one thing was clear. Someone was watching me. For days, I lived like a shadow inside my own home. Curtains drawn. Doors locked. Phone on silent. I didn't trust anyone. Not neighbors, not coworkers, not even the police officer who stopped by to check in and asked too many questions with a smile that didn't reach his eyes. I was unraveling, yes, but I wasn't stupid. I could feel the invisible strings tightening around me, like someone out there was waiting for me to take one wrong step. Daniel had warned me. Trust no one. I clung to that advice like a lifeline. I stopped calling Carter. I knew he meant well, but I couldn't risk leading anyone else into the fire. This was my mess now. My war. I became obsessed with the flash drive. Every night, after Ellie fell asleep clutching the stuffed bear Daniel gave her for her 5th birthday, I sat in the dark scrolling through files I could barely understand. Most were encrypted. But the names I could read, the transactions I could trace, they painted a picture of something far beyond infidelity. There were lists of offshore accounts, references to private contracts, and surveillance notes on foreign operatives. It was like stepping into a movie I hadn't auditioned for. Except this wasn't fiction. And I was starting to think my husband had been a ghost long before he vanished. Then I found it. A document buried in a folder marked medical. It was a scanned birth certificate. I almost skipped over it, until I saw the name. Rebecca Lee Anderson. My name. My full name. But the date of birth wasn't mine. It was 2 years earlier. And the parents listed weren't my parents. At first, I thought it was a glitch. A mistake. Then I found a second file, a medical report. Same name. Same fake birth date. But this one had a note at the bottom. Subject was successfully placed. Genetic link confirmed. Monitored biannually. My stomach turned. I didn't understand what I was looking at. A different Rebecca Anderson. Someone using my name. Or someone watching me. I couldn't shake the feeling that something had been hiding in plain sight my entire life. I called my mother. I asked her about my birth, where I was born, who delivered me. She seemed confused at first, then annoyed. She brushed off my questions like I was being paranoid, said she didn't remember the details of 40 years ago, then hung up. I'd never heard her speak to me that coldly before. It was like something in her had snapped the moment I asked. And that was the moment everything shifted. Because the only reason someone avoids a question that's simple is if the truth is worse than the lie. The next morning, I drove to the D.C. address Daniel had scribbled on the back of his letter, Howard Green. A tiny apartment building, unassuming and gray, just blocks from the Capitol. I buzzed his unit. No answer. I waited for 2 hours in my car. Finally, a man in his 70s stepped out of a cab and walked toward the door. I followed him. Howard Green. I asked. He froze. His eyes met mine. I saw recognition before he looked away. I don't know who that is. I stepped in front of him. Daniel sent me. Daniel Anderson. Or whatever his name really was. Please. I need to know what's happening. He looked past me, scanned the street, then motioned me inside. The apartment was sparse, clean, quiet. He made me sit before speaking. You shouldn't be here, he said. If they knew you found me, we'd both be dead by now. I asked him everything. Who Daniel was. Why he vanished. Why I was in danger. He hesitated, then sighed. Daniel worked for a government program that doesn't officially exist. Back in the late 80s, there was a classified project. They weren't looking for spies. They were looking for children. My skin prickled. Children. He nodded. Kids born under extreme surveillance. Raised in controlled environments. Their entire lives mapped out. It was about genetics. Control. Infiltration. They believed they could engineer loyalty if they got to them young enough. But some of the subjects disappeared. Went off-grid. Daniel was one of the handlers who tried to shut it down. But he fell in love with one of the girls they'd planted. That girl was you. I couldn't speak. I felt like the floor had dropped out from under me. What are you saying? I whispered. He leaned in. Rebecca, you were part of the program. You were taken as an infant. Given a new identity. Your parents were part of the cover. Daniel was supposed to monitor you. Make sure the experiment ran its course. But he couldn't do it. He tried to save you. That's why he disappeared. Because they found out. Everything blurred. I couldn't breathe. My childhood, my memories, my life, none of it was real. I wasn't just married to a liar. I was part of the lie. I stumbled out of the apartment, heart racing, vision shaking. I didn't even notice the man across the street until it was too late. He stepped toward me, calm, dressed in a gray suit like a banker. Mrs. Anderson, he said softly, almost kindly. We need to have a conversation. He stood too close. Not threatening, at least not in an obvious way, but there was something chilling in the calmness of his voice, like he'd done this before and expected me to follow a script. We need to have a conversation. That's what he said. No badge. No threat. Just a quiet command disguised as an invitation. And for a second, I didn't know what to do. My body froze, but my mind screamed. Run. But where? I didn't even know who I was anymore. Everything I believed, about Daniel, about my family, about myself, had been shattered in a matter of days. I didn't trust the ground under my feet. I didn't trust my own heartbeat. But I trusted one thing, Daniel's voice in that letter. Don't trust them. And I knew, without needing to ask, that this man in the gray suit was one of them. I turned away and walked, fast. Not quite running, but close. He didn't follow. Or maybe he did, but if he did, he didn't want me to know it. I made it back to my car, locked the doors, and drove without knowing where I was going. My hands were slick with sweat. My mouth tasted like copper. I kept glancing in the rearview mirror, convinced every car was tailing me, every stranger was a threat. By the time I got home, I was shaking. Ellie was at school, thank God. I had time. I needed to think, but thinking felt like a luxury I couldn't afford. I needed a plan. I needed proof. I needed leverage. Whatever this organization was, whatever they'd done to Daniel, whatever they'd done to me, I needed to hit back. But first, I had to understand what they were protecting. I went back to the flash drive. I knew I had missed something. There was one folder I hadn't opened, encrypted, double protected. I'd tried before and failed. But now I had a name, Project Solace. The name Howard had mentioned when he talked about the children, the surveillance, the manipulation. I used it as the password. And it worked. The folder opened. Inside were dozens of video files, each labeled with a code and a date. I clicked the first one. What I saw made my skin crawl. A sterile white room. A crib. A baby, me. Cameras recording from multiple angles. Doctors in lab coats speaking into microphones, noting behavioral patterns, logging developmental milestones. Subject 43 is displaying advanced emotional responses, one said. Attachment protocol has been successful. Continue observational immersion. I watched myself grow. Toddler, preschooler, kindergarten age. All of it filmed. All of it clinical. Every memory I thought was mine had been observed, catalogued, studied. My life was never private. Never mine. I sat there, numb, watching until I couldn't watch anymore. My tears were dry. My fear had calcified into something harder, fury. They'd used me. My parents. My home. Even Daniel, at first. And now they wanted to erase the evidence. But I wasn't going to let them. I backed up the drive to 3 separate locations. An encrypted cloud. A burner laptop. A hard drive I duct-taped inside a children's book in Ellie's room. If they came for me, they wouldn't be able to erase me. Not this time. That night, I didn't sleep. I waited. I knew they'd come. And they did. Around 2 a.m., I saw headlights down the road. A black SUV parked across the street. The same man from DC stepped out. Another followed, taller, heavier, no expression. I grabbed the kitchen knife I'd started keeping beside me. But I didn't move. Not yet. They didn't approach the house. They just stood there. Watching. Waiting. It was a message. We know where you are. And we're not done. I couldn't let Ellie stay here. I packed a small bag, called in a favor from Carter. He didn't ask questions, just gave me an address and said, "Get there. Don't look back." It was a cabin 2 hours north, secluded, surrounded by woods. I picked up Ellie from school the next day with a smile I didn't feel and told her we were going on a little adventure. She was excited. I was terrified. But I felt something else, too. Determined. Whatever they had planned for me, I wasn't going to play the part of the frightened pawn. I was done hiding. I was done crying. At the cabin, I found a phone left by Carter. One number programmed in. I dialed. A woman answered. Rebecca. Her voice was low, wary. "Yes," I said. "You don't know me, but I think you knew Daniel." Silence. Then, I knew him well. I told her what I had. What I'd seen. That I knew about Project Solace. About the children. About the surveillance. And I told her I wasn't going to let it stay hidden. Her voice changed then, stronger. "Then you're not alone." That night, I sat on the porch while Ellie slept, the flash drive clutched in my hand like a talisman. Somewhere out there, the people who built me were watching. Waiting. Trying to decide if I was still a tool or if I'd become a threat. I had the answer for them. I was both. It's strange how silence changes once you've seen the world for what it truly is. The silence out here in the woods, it used to be peaceful. Now it feels like something holding its breath, waiting to strike. Every crack of a branch outside the cabin, every shift in the wind, feels like it carries a message. I'm not safe. Not really. But for now, I'm hidden. Ellie is safe. And for the first time in weeks, I can breathe long enough to think. The woman I spoke to on the phone, her name is Dr. Rena Hale. She was part of the original Solace program, one of the behavioral analysts who defected after the project began steering into darker territory. She told me there were at least 50 children placed into civilian lives under false identities. Not all of them survived. Some disappeared. Some were reabsorbed into secondary roles, whatever that means. Others, well, she doesn't even know. The program was buried. The records were wiped. Anyone who spoke out either vanished or ended up disgraced. She said Daniel was one of the last to try and pull someone out. Me. I asked her what they wanted from me. What they still wanted. Her answer chilled me to the bone. You were the one who worked. The one who bonded too well. The emotional imprinting, the behavioral compliance, you became the proof that it could be done. And that terrified the ones who built you. You're not just a liability. You're the legacy they can't afford. I didn't want to believe it. But deep down, I did. All my life, I tried to make everyone happy. I'd followed every rule, tried to be the perfect wife, the perfect mother, the perfect daughter. And now I knew why. Because I was designed to. Every instinct I thought was mine had been shaped, sculpted, nudged into place like a puppet with no strings left visible. Except now, I'd cut the strings. I wasn't compliant anymore. I wasn't predictable. I was something far more dangerous to them. Free. Rena told me I had two choices. Go public, with the flash drive, the files, the video evidence. But that would come at a price. My identity would be exposed. Ellie's life would never be normal again. The men who built this wouldn't go down quietly. Or, I could disappear. Go dark. Assume a new identity. Live off-grid. Hide the evidence somewhere safe, in case it's ever truly needed. Raise my daughter in the shadows of a secret that could topple giants. At first, the answer seemed obvious. Burn it all down. Expose them. Watch the ones who played God finally face justice. But then I looked at Ellie, curled up in the cabin's old armchair, drawing flowers with broken crayons, and I knew. She didn't ask for this. She didn't deserve to grow up hunted. She deserved peace. even if it meant I would never have any. I left Rena with copies of everything. I asked her to hold them, quietly, until the time was right, or until someone stronger than me came along. She promised she would. And I believed her. I buried the drive I brought with me under a tree behind the cabin. Not because I wanted to hide the truth, but because I had to. The world isn't ready. And I'm not willing to let my daughter be the sacrifice for a war I didn't start. I changed our names. Again. I dyed my hair. Burned the last photo I had of Daniel. Not because I hated him, but because I needed to let go. He tried to save me. He died for it. And now, the only way I can honor that is by surviving. Sometimes I wonder what I would say to him if I had one more moment. Would I scream at him for the lies? Would I thank him for loving me, even when it was built on a mission? Maybe both. Maybe neither. Maybe I'd just ask him one question: was any of it real? And maybe that's the cruelest part, knowing I'll never get an answer. Knowing that the life I had was built on deception, and yet the love inside it still felt true. That contradiction haunts me. It probably always will. It's been 6 months now. We live in a quiet town where no one asks too many questions. I volunteer at the library. Ellie's made a friend down the street. I pretend not to notice the car that circles our block once every few weeks. I pretend not to feel the eyes on me in the grocery store. I pretend a lot of things. But I'm not who I was anymore. I'm not fragile. I'm not blind. I'm not hers, not the version of Rebecca they built in a lab and fed into a storybook life. I'm someone else now. Someone who sees the world for what it is and chooses to live anyway. To love anyway. To protect what matters. Sometimes I wake up gasping, heart racing, convinced it's over. That they've found us. That this second life is already crumbling. But then I see Ellie sleeping beside me, her tiny hand resting on mine, and I remember why I made the choice I did. Some wars aren't meant to be won in public. Some victories are small and quiet and sacred. And sometimes, justice isn't a courtroom, it's a little girl growing up free. So, this is where my story ends. Not with revenge. Not with justice. But with survival. With silence. With a secret buried deep enough to stay hidden. For now. Because I may be the product of a lie. But I refuse to raise my daughter in one.